why do you procrastinate? If you want to be an author and you've been saying it for years and you still haven't even started your book after 2 years, well, what is holding you back? Is it fear? Is it perfectionism? Is it not taking the first step? Is it being too overwhelmed? I ask a lot of questions for people to be very aware of why they procrastinate, because once you know the reason, the root cause of a problem, it's much easier to solve for it.
What is like your productivity routine specifically for writing or content creation?
I think productivity is this big word, right? Like where we think that we have to create more and do more and it's all about output. At one point I realized that we cannot talk about output if we don't talk about.
For today's episode, I am joined by Veronica Llorca-Smith, who is a published author, a public speaker, and the creator of the Lemon Tree Mindset newsletter on Substack. Veronica, great to have you here today.
Hi, Jari. Hello from the Canary Islands. I'm so excited to see you again.
Now, Veronica, you do many different things, right? You're an author, you're an entrepreneur, you're a public speaker, but you also compete in triathlons, and you're a mom of 2 children. How do you manage your time to make sure you balance all of these different roles?
So I think the key word there is balance. If you picture a balance, if you want to give something, you have to take of something else. And I think what's really important is to be aware of what your priorities are, what your vision is, but also being kind to yourself and knowing that, in my case, for example, if I want to be there for my children, that means that I'm not going to have the same amount of time as someone who doesn't have children or doesn't have that type of commitment. And I think this is a very important point because we are all bombarded with this idea of being productive and balancing it all. And I think it's okay to say, look, this is my life. These are my priorities at the moment. Because when you don't do that, I know what happens because I've been there and you end up burning out. And so I think balancing everything means being very clear on what your priorities are. So for me, being a mom is my number one priority. And that means that I'm not able to dedicate 12 hours to my business a day, as I probably would because I love what I do, but I have 2 little girls who want mommy's attention. And so that means that I have to dedicate less to my business so that I can really be there for them. And same with triathlon. Before I had children, before I had my own business, it was a big priority in my life. Just like for Jari, by the way. I used to do a lot of half Ironman. I did a full Ironman. At the time when I was training for full season, it was maybe 15 hours of exercise. And you know that that's pretty standard, not even for being on a podium, just to make it to the finish line. Well, today, triathlon, I still love sports, but it's definitely not my number one priority. And so I lowered down how much I exercise, the races that I go for. So I think being kind to yourself and understanding that in life, we go through phases, right? And today, my children are young. And so that's my priority. But in 5 years, they'll be like, Mom, we don't want to be with you. And so that's maybe when I will go back to triathlon. But I think the key is really to balance and to know that through different times of life, you're going to have different priorities and different focuses.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that identifying your priorities, that's really key here, right? And you mentioned there's different phases of life. When you do all these different things, let's say writing and public speaking, do you also treat that as different phases? Do you, for example, say, all right, this quarter, I'm really going to focus on writing or I'm really going to focus on public speaking? Or do you kind of intertwine it all in your weeks and months?
Yeah, so honestly, it's a bit of a mix. So to give some context, I'm only in year 3 of my business, and so it's still relatively young. And so when I was starting, I was trying to do a bit everything at the same time to see where I had more opportunities. Now that I've had 2 full cycles, I'm starting to realize that a lot of things are seasonal. And so, for example, public speaking. So my public speaking is for companies, is for organizations like financial services, banks, insurance, and they tend to have a cycle. For example, March, April tends to be very busy. That's when they have budgets. That's when they are booking speakers for training, speakers for events, and things like that. Same during the month of October and November, for example. That tends to be quite busy. And so now I know ahead. And so knowing these, you can start to prepare your pipeline. And I know that the best time to pitch It's just before those busy periods. On the other hand, during the summertime, there's barely anything happening. And same for Christmas, for example, when it comes to public speaking. And so I know that is a little bit more quiet. So I think having a temperature check and a pulse check on your business and understanding the seasonality, very similar to triathlon, you're not always training for a race. Usually you have your seasons for races. And so I think trying to understand a bit the different periods, the different peak periods, but also low seasons so that you can plan your business accordingly. And as an example, this month of July, I'm in the Canary Islands. So for context, I live in Hong Kong, but I'm originally from the Canary Islands in Spain. And I've spent the entire month of July here because it's much more quiet for my business as well. It's a great period to come and visit. And in terms of public speaking, I had one session this month. So yes, I think knowing the seasons and adjusting accordingly can really be very helpful when you're juggling multiple things.
Yeah, that seasonality, that's something like I started adopting myself as well a few years ago, where I really thought like, okay, like indeed business operates in cycles as well, and like life operates in seasons. And I think that also allows for more flexibility where you can say, okay, this season I'm just going to focus on, let's say, building my business, or this season I'm more focused on, family life, or this season of my life I'm going to focus more on myself, my health, my physical health and mental health. And I think that's really a good way to balance all of these different things rather than trying to do it all at once. Now, Veronica, you're a published author and you're a pretty successful creator on Substack, right? You publish a lot of articles. What is like your productivity routine specifically for writing or content creation?
So I think productivity is this big word, right? Like where we think that we have to create more and do more and it's all about output. And at one point I realized that we cannot talk about output if we don't talk about input. Anything, right? If you think of a machine, if you want to assess the output, the first thing is that you have to look at the input. And so all human beings, we need to be very aware of what we put into our system and our well-being. So the quality of our sleep. And one question that I very often ask in my sessions about productivity is, what do you need to be at your best? And I would ask you this question, Jari, like, what do you need to be at your best? Because there's so many productivity books that are kind of copy paste frameworks. And the reality is that we all need different things. And so when I hear advice like wake up at 5 a.m., and I do wake up at 5 a.m., by the way, but I would never tell people you have to wake up at 5 a.m. because every individual is different. We have different circadian rhythm, different body clocks. And so I think understanding yourself and what you need to be at your best is critical to then be able to do your best work. So in my case, for example, things that really help me with my productivity routine. So I think sleep is so important. And very often the first thing that we cut is sleep, but it's actually probably the first thing that we should really protect above many things. Sports is a big part of my life, but also my routine as a writer. I do find, and I'd love to hear from you, that I find clarity when I'm running. I run without a phone, without music. Very often it's just me. And it's really a moment to find clarity and to be able to prioritize. I always say that my run starts with a problem and ends with a solution, because very often I start the day with this gigantic monster of a problem. And then when I finish, I break it down into small pieces and I realize that it's actually not that bad. So I think having a good fitness routine really helps for me. Again, my question is, what do you need to be successful? For some people, it might be meditation. Some people like journaling in the morning or just going for a walk. But I think understanding what you need to do to be at your best is critical. And then something that's very interesting, and I was more aware of this when I became a mom, is that before having children, I used to have the luxury of time. I had all the time in the day, and if I didn't do something in the morning, okay, I can do it later in the afternoon. Now I don't really have that luxury anymore. My kids, they're still quite young, and so they finish school at 3 p.m. And so that means that I have to be very mindful and very aware of what my good productive hours are. Because when we talk about productivity, we also have to know, when are you at your prime? And for me, as a morning person, I know that those hours in the morning, especially with my children not being there and having a quiet house, are the best time to be able to be productive. And so back to the productivity routine. One, I set myself up for success by knowing what are the things that work for me and what are the things that I need to be at my best. But also, I try to make the most of the available and disposable time that I have. And so, those hours in the morning, I do the critical stuff. There's this book called Eat That Frog. I don't know if you've read it. I don't remember the.
I love it. Brian Tracy, yeah.
Yes. And the idea, the frog is the thing, the task, the project that triggers the biggest resistance. And so, this idea of tackle that thing first in the morning, because if you don't, you're going to be wasting your energy on thinking about it and procrastinating about it and not doing it. And so back to the point of how do you create your routine, I always think, okay, what is the frog today? What are the things that I need to tackle? What are the projects that are going to suck the highest level of energy? And then I can prioritize those. And then when I have times later in the day when I don't have that much quiet space or environment, I might do things that are more like admin or replying messages or commenting on Substack. But I think how you organize your day based on your disposable time, your family circumstances, I think we all have to play around with that. And there'll be some people in the audience who don't have children, but you might have a full-time job. It's very similar. You have to make the most of the little disposable time that you have after those hours.
I really love what you said there, where this is like the productivity routine I've been following for years, and I call it the morning is for making and the afternoon is for managing. And this is something that I personally find works for me. It might not work for you, right? But using those morning hours when I'm at my most productive to make new things. That's like content creation, it's writing, it's building products, right? Stuff that requires deep work, requires my mental focus. I find that I do that way better in the morning. And then the afternoon, I use that for managing, like you said, administrative tasks, maybe meetings, right? Things that I can do because naturally later in the afternoon, I'm less productive or less focused, maybe a bit of an afternoon slump, right? So like administrative tasks or meetings are much better for me to schedule in the afternoon. So I think knowing your own rhythm, your own productivity rhythm, because for other people it might be flipped around, right? It might be that the afternoon they're more productive or in the evening they're more productive, but finding that rhythm that works for you, I think that's really important there. And Veronica, you talked about that, right? Procrastination, especially with eating that frog, right? You wrote the book on procrastination, the anti-procrastinator. What's aside from eating that frog, what's one of the most effective tips you have for creators and solopreneurs to really conquer procrastination? Because it's such a big problem for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And so, to give a bit of background on the book, there's so much literature on the topic of procrastination. And so, when I pitched to my publisher, Penguin Random House, I really wanted to have an idea that was different, that was unique from the literature that is out there on procrastination. And what I noticed is kind of what you just asked me, like, what are some tips to beat procrastination? But I realized that everyone is going to need different tips. And if I told you that you need to wake up at 5 a.m., well, in your case, Jari, I think it would work because you're a triathlete. But for other people, that might not be the right advice.
I tried it, but I'm not. I need my 8 hours of sleep, and I'm not that awake at 5 o'clock. To be honest, I have to admit.
Well, that's a good example. And so you might read a book that's telling you to wake up at 5 a.m. and you don't, and then you feel guilty about it and you enter this negative spiral. And so that was not my idea of creating the book. What I wanted to do, and I will address your question about the tips, is to get people to really have an exercise of reflection and introspection and get to know themselves, to understand why do you procrastinate. If you want to be an author and you've been saying it for years and you still haven't even started your book after 2 years, what is holding you back? Is it fear? Is it perfectionism? Is it not taking the first step? Is it being too overwhelmed? And I ask a lot of questions for people to be very aware of why they procrastinate. And I think this is critical because once you know the reason, the root cause of a problem, it's much easier to solve for it. And the problem in today's society is that we're very often trying to find solutions, but we don't really know what we're solving for. And so it's very comfortable to say, oh, there's a book here that is going to help me overcome procrastination. And you're jumping straight to the solution, but solution comes from solving. And so the question is, what are you solving for? So in the book, one of the most highlighted parts is when I talk about different profiles of procrastination. And Jari, maybe you can start thinking like if you identify yourself with any of these profiles, because one very interesting thing is that we procrastinate, but for different reasons and for different projects, meaning there might be something that you are super excited about and you don't procrastinate, but something that you actually tend to postpone and you have resistance and it becomes a frog. And some of the profiles are the perfectionist, I think, is a very common one that we all face. So we put the bar up there. And so one tip for the people who tend to be perfectionists, and I know that I was like that, is instead of putting the super high bar, just set a bar. And maybe you start here. It's like with triathlon. We've both done Ironman, but we didn't start signing up for an Ironman. We said, well, first I'm going to do a sprint, which is the lowest common denominator of triathlon. So set a bar and take it from there. So that's the number one tip. But of course, going back to, are you a procrastinator? What type of procrastinator you are? Another one that's very common is the worrier, the procrastinator who worries. You worry about publishing content on LinkedIn, for example, because you're going to be judged by your colleagues. You worry about launching a course because it's not going to be good enough and you feel that people are going to be judging the quality of your work. And so if you tend to worry, my tip is, and what I use is, instead of thinking of what is the worst case scenario, I think of what is the best case scenario. And the best case scenario is that you actually publish something and then you take it from there. And so understanding the root cause and then trying to find tips really, really helps. A very common one, and this is tends to happen a lot with students, for example, is the last minute procrastination. The profile that I called is the crisis maker. You need to wait until the last minute for things to happen. So you're going to have an exam. You know that you're going to have an exam for 6 months, and you know that the clock is ticking, and yet you wait until 48 hours before the exam, and then you start to caffeinate yourself to go for that sprint and that study. This happens very often. And so a tip there is like, okay, if you're this type of procrastinator, how you can break that project into small projects, mini steps. That really helps. For example, when I wrote my book, The Anti-Procrastinator, my publisher only gave me 3 months to write it and send the manuscript. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, how am I going to do this? And so many mornings I would procrastinate, like everything would come, all these different types of procrastinators, the crisis maker and the perfectionist and the worrier. And I had to fight all these different demons. And one of the things that really helped me was to break down the project into small pieces. So I was thinking, okay, a book is roughly 60,000 words. I have 3 months. I want to make sure that by month 2, I already have a first draft, because editing takes almost just as much as writing. That means that if I have 60 days to write 60,000 words, roughly on a daily basis, I have to write around 1,000 words. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't as daunting and it wasn't as intimidating as saying, oh my God, I need to write a book in 3 months. So I hope these tips help, this idea that you really have to dig a little bit deeper to understand where procrastination is coming from, why, understand what your demons are, and then it's much easier to be able to course correct and take these corrective measures.
Well, absolutely. Like, I am the crisis maker. That's definitely the archetype that I am, and especially in the past, like you said, as a student, right, studying for an exam, leaving that up to the last moment. But I would also actually take that in my first years of business, where I would set a deadline to create a course, and actually only in the last few days of like before the deadline, I would really focus and get stuff done. And the tip you gave, like breaking it down into smaller checkpoints and actually like pulling your deadline forward in that sense, but with smaller checkpoints, that completely changed the game for me. Where it's like, if that's naturally the way you operate, maybe like a deadline motivates you, then okay, create more deadlines and put that deadline more to the forefront. That absolutely changed the game for me. So you mentioned the perfectionist, the warrior, the crisis maker. Are there any other like procrastination archetypes?
Yes. So one that's very interesting is the overachiever and the overcommitter, let's say. And very often, especially as creators, we tend to do everything and we want to do everything. And we take so many commitments on that at one point we feel overwhelmed because we're already committed to 100 things. This happens very often with moms, in particular, moms who also have their business. I have noticed, because I used to be this profile. You might be pulled into parent volunteering activities and into a committee for something. And as women in particular, I'm going to generalize, but we tend to struggle to say no. So we tend to say yes very often. And so we end up with this really full plate. And I think this idea of learning to be comfortable to say no without being rude, just to protect yourself, to protect your boundaries, to protect the quality of your work, I think it's so critical. And I'd love to hear from you. But as a creator, I've really evolved from saying yes to everything to being much more conscious and deliberate of the projects that I want to take, the clients that I take on board, the things that I said yes to, the things that I said no to, or perhaps is yes, but later. And I think this can really be a game changer for many procrastinators. So I'd love to hear from you, Jari, because for me, it's still a learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that for me nowadays, it's really my framework on saying yes or no. It's not, is this gonna be okay and good or not okay and not good? It's like, is it a hell yes? And if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, right? So if there's a new opportunity passing by, is this opportunity a hell yes opportunity? If it's not a hell yes, I'm not doing it. It's a no, right? So I set the bar a bit higher on what I want to commit my time to really make sure it's worth my time. Because I think a lot of opportunities or a lot of requests that people can have, it's like, oh yeah, there's some benefit in it, or I could do it, or it could be nice. But I think all those could be nice projects and opportunities, that's what's going to overwhelm you. That's at least what I experienced. So for me, it's like, is it a hell yes? If it's not a hell yes, then it's a no.
Fantastic. I love what you said about if it's not a hell yes. I think I'm going to borrow this. And that's the beauty of what we do. Like we're learning from each other. And just to finish on the profiles, because I think it's a really good exercise. And I can do a little summary if you want. There's one more that I think we all face at some point, which is the rebel. And the rebel is when, even if you're the most driven person in the world, there is some type of task that you just can't stand, that it just triggers that reaction. For me, it's the bureaucracy and the accounting thing. And I'm like, oh, I could be writing and being creative. And here I am with this pile of invoice and this pile of documents for my business. And so that creates a lot of resistance. And so I waste a lot of time thinking about not doing it and why it's so silly to do these. And so you waste a lot of time complaining about why this is silly and why you shouldn't be doing it and why there's a better way of doing it. But eventually, if you're going to do that, then just pull the trigger and go for it instead of just wasting all this time and energy about complaining and being a victim.
I love that you mentioned this archetype because this is exactly me. Like what you just described, you're super motivated to work on your business and to create, and that becomes more naturally to you. But the moment it's like taxes, administrative work, like accounting, like any bureaucracy things, I like am a still to this day a big procrastinator on those type of tasks, and it can really frustrate me. Like you said, you just like kind of have to do it. But is there anything that helped for you to make those type of tasks easier? Because that's really still something I'm struggling
Yeah,
with myself.
absolutely. And something we haven't talked about, and I think is an interesting topic, is decide what you want to delegate. Because especially as your business starts to scale, and in your case, you're three of you, so and you're growing so fast. So there are certain tasks that you won't be able to do yourself, or if you do them, is at the expense of spending time on a task that will add more value. So in my case, for example, my business is in Hong Kong. So now I outsource the part of the accounting and taxes and all of that. And that has been such a relief. I'm still the one who does the bulk, let's say, of filling in what my invoices are and things like this. But one, delegating has helped a lot. And second, what I used to do is leave everything for the year to the last minute. And similar to what I was saying before, now I have a very strict routine where almost on a daily basis, if I have an invoice, if I have to issue an invoice for a client, or if I have to collect documents, I try to do it almost on a daily basis. And it's just become this habit that you almost don't think about, like brushing your teeth. Is like, oh, one little step that I take today. And it's made such a difference, to be honest, both from a productivity standpoint, but also the mental piece of not reaching the end of the fiscal year and thinking, oh my God, I need to do all these reports. So having a system in place that works for you and seeing if you can afford to delegate, where you can do that has been a game changer for me. But I'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. Delegating those tasks, especially if you're a business owner, right, or entrepreneur, where I think your unique strengths are in that maybe strategy part or creation part or really the sales or marketing part, and then like outsourcing or delegating all those other tasks that you might be procrastinating on, and that's not necessarily up to you to do it. And that is definitely something I personally need to look more into. I can be a lot of DIYer, like I'll do it myself rather than delegating. So that's definitely a tip I'll be working on myself. Veronica, let's talk a bit about triathlons because you've done many triathlons, right? You've done an Ironman, you've done many half Ironmans, I believe. What does like the role of triathlons play in your personal life and in your professional life?
So I started triathlon over 10 years ago. And for me, it was such a transformational change in my lifestyle. First, I thought that it was just a sport, but then I realized that it became a lifestyle, really, because you focus so much on your health, and it impacted my personal and professional life in many, many ways. The resilience that you build through triathlon, any endurance sport in particular, is incredible when you've been running for 2 hours and you know that you're only halfway there and you still need to keep going. I don't know for the people in the audience, but an Ironman, in my case, it can be faster for some, but in my case, it was over 12 hours of non-stop exercise from swimming to biking to running. It helps you build a lot of resilience. And what I have found is that my work, even though I talk a lot about creativity, I talk a lot about digital strategy, I have also a big part where I talk about mindset. In fact, my publication is called The Lemon Tree Mindset, because I think that the mindset is the most important tool that we have for anything, in this case, for our business. And I often say that the mindset is the software. I like the visualization of, your computer. So the mindset is the software, and then the strategy is the hardware. And a lot of the things that I talk about in regards to mindset, they come from triathlon. And I'm going to give some examples that really influence me, and with some quotes from triathlon as well that people always are curious about. One of my favorite phrases is your race, your pace. I think this is such a good one because in the creator world, to make that comparison, it's very easy to get distracted, to be jealous, to compare ourselves with others. And so we kind of lose our focus because we see that someone else might be much faster. They might be growing at a much faster pace. But the reality is that this is really your race, right? This is really your journey. And it's only fair to compare yourself with where you were 6 months ago. And so for me, when I finished the Ironman, my goal was not to beat the person next to me. It was really to be able to cross the finish line and have that moment of personal satisfaction. So this is one of the examples on how I feel that triathlon really impacts what I do. When I talk also about positivity, is very a big part of what I do. The lemon tree is the imagery of something positive, something that is blossoming, something that's growing. Very similar with triathlon. You start with a small seed. No one is born an Olympian, right? You start from zero, and you dedicate so many hours of solo training, and you wake up very often in the dark to go training. And it's only sometimes after years of work that you see the result of what you've done. So, Jari, these are just a couple of examples because I could take the entire hour to talk about how much triathlon has impacted me, both personally and professionally. For me, it's everywhere. I even do sessions, which is very interesting. I never thought that would happen, but I have a session for business and organizations for public speaking that is called an athlete's mindset. And it's a session that I actually charge for. And the most incredible thing is that I'm not an Olympian. I don't have any massive records to really be on stage as to talk about sports. But the reality is, and that's my message in this session, you don't need to be an Olympian to enjoy the benefits of sports, not only triathlon, but this idea of planning, this idea of being positive, this idea of long term. So it's influenced my work as well in a very, very specific way, where I even talk about sports in the sessions that I deliver.
I love that you really incorporate that in your publication and in your work, because I do definitely think for entrepreneurs, there's so many lessons in that athlete's mindset, because especially with a triathlon and an Ironman, you learn so much from it, and you learn to be mentally resilient, like you said as well, not compare yourself too much with the other participants, but really your race, your pace. There's so many lessons there to be learned in any form of sports, whether it's a triathlon or any other sports, I would say. One thing I still clearly remember when I did my Ironman last year was the day before they have this briefing, right? And it was this guy from the Ironman organization, and he was like hyping everyone up, and he said like, well, the moment that you completed your Ironman, in the days, the weeks, the months, the years later, if you ever face any setback, you can think back to that moment and think to yourself, okay, but I completed an Ironman, so I can also tackle this. Now, when I first heard him say that, I was like, yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, like whatever. And I actually found that to be true. Like, whenever I'm facing some sort of setback in my business or personal life, I can go back to the Ironman I did, and for me it was a long day. It took me 15 hours. It was I had quite a struggle actually, with some muscle cramps and all of that stuff. And I can go back and think of, okay, but I did that, so calm down. You can handle this setback as well. Just do it on your own pace, step by step. Just make progress. All of those lessons from that triathlons have basically taught me. So I like that you incorporated that into your business, really. In that workshop that you give about the athlete's mindset, what is some like mindset shift that you notice a lot of people resonate with?
So one of them is this idea of visualization and daring your dream to dream big. Because very often what I notice is that we put ourselves in a box, and we put ourselves the limitation of what we think we can and we cannot do. And I talk specifically about one example that resonates and inspires a lot of people. Is this, you've probably heard about them, dad and son. I think they're called the Hoyt family. And the son had cerebral palsy. And one of his dreams was to run, to do a race. And long story short, the dad, he built this special chair. They did a 5K run. And then when the son finished the race, he said, "Dad, I loved it. When I run, I don't feel that I'm disabled." And so that opened a journey of, I think they did over 1,000 triathlons together in
Wow.
years. It's incredible. But both of them, they had to visualize that that was possible, and they had to allow themselves to dream big. And it might sound a bit cliche, but if I had never allowed myself to dream big and to say, one day I want to have a book published with the biggest publisher in the world, even if I'm starting later in life, even if English, like for you, is my second language, even if I don't have a background in writing, if I hadn't had that dream, then you can't chase it. And I wouldn't have the book that I have today, which I'm very proud of. I wouldn't have that if I hadn't allowed myself to dream. And it's very similar back to the triathlon and how I draw these comparisons. If you don't think that you can complete an Ironman, I can tell you right now, you will not complete an Ironman. And it took me so much mental work to just sign up for an Ironman, because I was never going to sign up, because I didn't think that it was for me. I thought, I'm a small woman. This is not for me. I had never pictured that. And just allowing yourself to remove all these mental limitations that we have, that I would say is one of the biggest lessons.
So, as you're a mom of two kids and you train for triathlons, and you run a business, how did you design your business in a way that it really supports your lifestyle and that you have the flexibility or freedom to focus on your children, to focus on triathlons as well?
So it's very similar to what we discussed at the beginning in terms of knowing what your priorities are, and also knowing how, back to the seasonality and the phases in life. So right now, for example, I'm not training for an Ironman, but there is one triathlon that I love doing, is the Phuket triathlon. If there's any triathlete in the call, it's a fantastic triathlon that takes place in Phuket every year. And so I try to shift my goals based on what my priorities are. But something that is very interesting, and I would really encourage people to be creative and use some innovation, is how you can connect those different pillars, let's say, of those different areas of interest. And I want to give some examples. So I love writing, obviously. I'm an author. And I'm passing this passion to my children. Sometimes it's consciously, but it's also unconsciously. Like if you ask them, what does mommy do? They'll say, mommy writes books. I do many other things. But for them, that's something visual that they can understand. And when my daughter, the oldest one, when she was 6, she told me that she wanted to write a book. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, you write the story and I help you edit and do the illustration and all of that. And it was incredible. The next day, she came with a little story that she had written about a little rabbit and super cute story. And so she said, Mom, the story is here. Can we work on it together? And we did. And we actually self-published a book that is called The Story of the Little Rabbit, published it on Amazon. I found an illustrator on Fiverr, and I actually worked on a project that I'm passionate about with my daughter. And so my identities of being a mom, but also being a writer, passing this passion to my children was all at once. And I do the same with sports. Very often I take my children to do races with me. When they were little, I had a double pram, and I was living in Australia at the time. And I used to do a 5K run called a park run with them in the pram. And now they love running. So one of the things that I haven't talked today about is this idea of intertwining these different areas. I love sports, and I found a way to integrate talks about sports for businesses, which is something that blows me away. Like, wow, I never thought that my passion and my business and being a mom could all be interconnected. And I think today is a really good example. We're talking more about lifestyle really than anything else.
So instead of compartmentalizing all the different things you do, you integrate it into, you make sure it weaves into each other. And I really love that perspective. That's something that I can personally still work on. I think I still like, or I still automatically think of the things I do in terms of like silos or like compartmentalizing it. But if you integrate it more with each other, then it becomes your lifestyle basically. And you don't have to see it as all of these separate different projects.
And Jari, one more example that I think can be relevant and can maybe trigger some ideas. I also like to do some nonprofit work, some pro bono work, especially as a speaker. There are many organizations, especially NGO, that are always looking for speakers. And what I do is to connect with nonprofits that have to do, especially with women from underprivileged backgrounds, but also with sports. And so, for example, this year, I'm the brand ambassador for a nonprofit company in Hong Kong that uses sports as a tool of empowerment for women, especially for women from underprivileged backgrounds, like domestic helpers, for example. And again, this is something that brings my passion for sports, my passion for women empowerment. I bring that into doing talks. I'm going to be doing a race with them. And the interesting thing is that actually helps me then get other talks because other companies see me. Oh, yes, I know this woman. She's a mom and she's also a writer. Oh, maybe she has a talk that she can do for us for paid. And so again, I want to just throw some ideas there because very often we don't really know how we can connect the dots. And there's so many hidden links there.
Let's talk a little bit about staying motivated and staying positive as an online creator that, let's say, is working hard, right? They are creating content, but they're not really seeing the progress or results that they want. How do you recommend someone to like keep going and stay motivated when the results are not really there?
It's a tricky one because I think we've all been there. I've been there of writing and writing and writing and creating and not seeing the results. And I think there's a lot of advice there that can be a bit of a double-edged sword. For example, keep showing up and write every day. And one of the things that I realized after a lot of thinking is that consistency is not a proxy for strategy. And what I mean by this is that if you show up every day, but you're not really improving the skill, you're not really assessing your results, you're not really getting feedback on how to get better, you will get better, but it's going to be marginal and it's going to be very slow. And because we're talking today about sports, there's a very good analogy that I use for myself. In sports, we call junk miles. When instead of going for like a hardcore short sprint 20-minute run, which is super hardcore, you're like, oh, you know what, I'm going to go for a 30-40 minute chilled run and I'm going to feel great about it because I exercise. But we call it junk mile because that's not really helping you get better. It's not really helping you with your speed. Yes, you keep a certain level of fitness, but it's not really helping you get to the next level. And so I often say that we also very often throw junk miles on the keyboard because we keep doing the same thing again and again, but we're not getting better with our marketing. We're not analyzing what are the best performing articles. We're not really getting perhaps an external feedback to understand where we can improve. In my case, for example, when I wrote my third book, which is called The Flight Home, is more of a memoir, I wasn't able to find a publisher and I was kind of stuck with that book. And at that point, I decided that I needed external help. I had already self-published 2 books. I had done a lot of writing, but I felt that I was reaching a little bit of a plateau. And so at that point, I hired an external coach, a writing mentor, and it was an investment and it was time, it was effort. But sometimes if you don't see the result, yes, being consistent is important, but I would really look at the strategy and see, what am I doing? Am I just adding junk miles on the keyboard? Is there something that I can do better? I do feel that creators very often we focus so much on output and creating when what I realize is that sometimes it's not about creating more. You can look back at 6 months of work, look at your best performing pieces of content. It could be a course, it could be a post, it could be whatever it is, and see, how can I double down on the things that are working? Because in my experience, I would say that only the 10% of my work is really move the needle. It's like you have to write 10 okay articles or 9 okay articles to have a 10 that does really well. And so being very aware of what are the things that are moving the needle, what are the things that I'm having success at, and how can I do more of it. So that's definitely something that I'm trying to do more. And I'd love to hear from you as well, because it's such a common situation.
I would really like to emphasize what you said about seeking feedback. And I would say being open to feedback. If there's one thing I would have done differently myself, it was opening up myself more to feedback in the early stages of being an entrepreneur and actively seeking out feedback, whether that is through a coach or consultant or even a mentor or just even other entrepreneurs and creators, like asking them, what can I do better? Because it took me 18 months to make my first dollars online. Like I always talk about this story. And if I would have been more open to feedback, if I didn't take that DIY approach, I'll figure it out myself, I could have shortcutted that time to, let's say, 3 months, right? I could have saved myself at least a year of those junk miles and like hard work and especially a lot of like frustration if I would have just been more open to feedback, seek it out more actively. Because indeed, like you said, consistency is important. But if you're consistently doing the wrong things or suboptimal things, you're not going to get there and it's going to be very frustrating. So just like having someone look over your shoulder, giving you tips on how to improve, uncovering your blind spots, that's definitely one thing I would have recommended my younger self. Now, talking about that, actually, Veronica, last question for you. And I asked this question to everyone on the podcast. If you could go back in time and give your younger entrepreneurial self 3 lessons or insights, what would they be?
Oh my God, first there'll probably be more than 20, I guess. But no, it's a really good question. And I love what you said about, in your case, if you could go back, you would ask for feedback. In my case, when I started, the name solopreneur is very misguiding because it tells you that you're supposed to be solo. But to be successful, I think collaborating is so important. In my case, I think in the first year, I didn't collaborate with anyone. I was very friendly. I would reply to messages and all of that. But I didn't really leverage the power of collaboration. And so if I could go back from the very beginning, I would say, hey, who is someone who is on a similar journey and you can collaborate with? Who is someone that you can have some partnership with? Because I think collaboration is acceleration. And today, my strategy, one of the key pillars is collaborating. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be here today with you, because I think it's such an incredible way to grow and to learn from each other. Very often, we tend to look at other people as competitors, but also your competitors are very often your best collaborators, because you always have areas of synergies. You can have gaps that you can cover with someone else's expertise. So I think collaborating would be one of them. The second would be the power of sharing your story. So often we think that we have to do something incredible, like break a world record or something to share our story. And what I realized when I started sharing mine is that there's so many people who can relate and who will benefit from hearing your story, whether it's the challenge of going through a burnout, whether it's becoming a mom and not knowing how to juggle everything, whether it's your journey of transitioning from the corporate world to starting your own business. And as you said, not making a dollar for 18 months. So I would share my story earlier because you don't need to be a world best anything to have a story worth sharing. I think everyone's story has something for someone. And the third one, it sounds very basic, but remember to have fun. When I started in the corporate world, no one talks about having fun. Everybody talks about the P&L, and profits and all of that. And I think one of the beautiful things about doing your own business, in my case, is that I can really decide what are the projects that I want to take. And fun and joy is a really big part of it. So that's why for today's session, I was so excited to talk about this topic because it's a topic that I'm passionate about, how to build a lifestyle first business. It's incredible. And so remember to find things that you really enjoy and how to bring your passion. In my case, my passion as a mom, my passion as a triathlete, and you don't necessarily have to have all in different buckets. You can actually find ways to connect the dots.
Those are amazing insights. Veronica, where should people go if they want to learn more about you and what you're doing?
I think the best place to find me is the Lemon Tree Mindset on Substack. And if there's someone who speaks Spanish, I have the Spanish version called El Limonero. But that's definitely the best place to find me, the best place to plant your seed to grow your lemon tree.
We'll link to that in the show notes for people to check out. Veronica, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your lessons with us here today. Really was a pleasure. I took a lot of notes myself.
Thank you, Yari. It was awesome to spend the morning with you.